And now I'm going to introduce our speaker this evening. As you've already known him as our Banquet chair, vice chair, and a great climber and a great friend, and someone I respect very much for all these adventurous things that he does. Our speaker tonight really got down, way down under, and climbed Mt Vinson on the Antarctica subcontinent. I guess it's a subcontinent, I'm not sure. That helped me to welcome to the speech tonight, Paul Garry.
Okay, thank you. Let me get my screen going here. This one. Share. Sorry. Okay, I want to make sure, can everyone see my screen?
It's working perfectly.
Okay, thank you. So this is a presentation about Mount Vinson, which is the highest peak in Antarctica at 16,000 feet. And I did this over 2 weeks at the end of 2019. I had decided in about August of 2019 to try to get on a trip to Antarctica since I was itching to get on a big mountain again. It had been a few years since I had climbed anything outside the country. And Mount Vinson is, or it's sometimes called Vinson Massive, is the tallest peak in Antarctica and one of the so-called 7 summits. I had climbed 4 of the other 7 summits, Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, Elbrus, and Denali. And this seemed like a unique experience to go to a part of the world that, very few people go to. And it wasn't too long of a trip or too high elevation, but, completely different than going anywhere else in the world. And I knew the owner of a guiding company called Climbing the 7 Summits, a guy named Mike Hamill, because he was my guide when I climbed Choyo-Yu in the Himalayas in 2008. So I signed up with his company in August for the trip in December. I didn't give myself much time to get ready, but what the heck, I just decided to go for it. Mount Vincent is typically a 2-week trip offered between late November and early January of each year during the Antarctic summer. They have a very short climbing season. And as I go through this, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box and I'll be able to get to them at the end because I won't be able to see any of the questions come up as I'm going through the slides. So please indulge me till we do question and answer at the end. So Antarctica, where is it and how do you get there? That's the first thing. And since I had gotten the last spot on the plane that flies down there, I first had to get there. So typically you fly from Los Angeles to Santiago, Chile. I had to actually have a stopover in Lima, Peru. And then from Santiago, you fly down to Punta Arenas, Chile, which is in Patagonia, almost at the bottom of the continent. And it takes about 24 hours of travel to get down there with layovers and so forth. And then from Punta Arenas, you fly to Antarctica. It's about a 4-hour flight from there. And I'll show you the kind of logistics of the flight as well. So here's a little map of Antarctica. You can see where our flight from Punta Arenas came to what's called the Union Glaciers, the camp where we landed at, which is about 700 miles from the South Pole in the Ellsworth mountain range, which is the highest range in Antarctica. There are lots of the Antarctic research stations on the Antarctic Peninsula. So any flights coming to that peninsula and that part of Antarctica go from South America. Flights to the other side of the continent tend to go from Cape Town in South Africa. So you can get to it from both directions, but to Union Glacier, it's always from Punta Arenas. Some people, as I said, will ski. The last degree is a big thing to do. So they'll take another flight to the 89 degrees and ski to 90 degrees. I wasn't there to do that on this trip. So once we got to Punta Arenas, there's a big sign. Punta Arenas is the capital of Chilean Patagonia. It's also one of the gateways to the national parks in that area, including Torres del Paine, which is very famous. It's been the jumping off point and the starting off point for lots of Antarctic expeditions for over a century. There's access to the Drake Passage from here, and cruise ships that go to Antarctica often leave from Punta Arenas and Ushuaia, which is nearby. And behind here is the Straits of Magellan, as how boats get around the bottom of South America. So this is where we met up with the other people that are going to be on our expedition with my teammates. There were 4 of us. There was Tony on the left from Great Britain, Roxana from the Ukraine, but she lives in London, Elena from North Macedonia, and myself and our guide, not pictured, was from Ecuador, and a second guide would meet us when we were down in Antarctica, who was from also from the States. So we had a few days in Punta Arenas, which is a nice kind of colonial, kind of inspired looking town. I'm not sure what the population is, maybe 100,000 people. It's the biggest city within many hundreds of miles in the area. This hotel has a bar named after Ernest Shackleton down in the basement, which was kind of nice. You can see the architecture. It was unusual that there was some civil unrest in Chile in the summer of 2019. So we encountered many boarded up businesses here, which was, and graffiti and statues that had been defaced. Not dissimilar from what we saw in protests going on here last year. But this was a unique experience to see that kind of stuff. But there was nothing happening while we were there. It kind of all passed over. But there's some shops, you can get some gear in Punta Arenas. We had some time to kill getting things arranged, so we took a day trip to an island to go see some penguins. And I was able to bag the island high point of this little island. So I would at least get one peak on this trip if all else failed. So I was glad to have that in my bag. These are the Magellanic penguins that live on the island. We could walk around the island on a path, and they're pretty, they don't seem to be too concerned about people. If you get a little too close with them, they'll start yelling at you, but then you clear away and they're fine. It was a nice day trip out, and one of the better things to see as a tourist in the town. So getting ready for the climb down there, we had to do a lot of gear sorting and packing of all the expedition equipment we would need in our hotel rooms. And then because of the way the flights work, we had to have all our bags in duffel bags that would be put on the plane to fly down to Antarctica and weighed. They need to weigh everything that goes on the flight. We were only allowed, I'm not sure how many kilos we were allowed, 45 kilos, 50 kilos, something like that, in duffel bags in our pack were allowed on the plane. They had to get all of this packed and ready because once we're checked in, we could be on a 2-hour notice when the weather clears and ready to fly. So that all had to be done in advance of actually departing. And also part of the whole protocol is we had to go to an orientation a briefing with the logistics company they're called Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions, or ALE. They're the one that operates the Union Glacier Base Camp and the flight to get to Union Glacier. So once we had our orientation, then we were kind of on standby and really couldn't go anywhere until the weather cleared, because we couldn't be more than a couple hours away from town. But we did have some bad weather forecasts, so we knew we had a full day where we didn't have to be on standby the next day. So a few of us rented a truck and decided to go get some exercise, and I found on Peak Bagger a peak nearby, about an hour's drive down a road called Monte Tarn. So we thought we'd go do a little more hiking. There's snow at 2,700 feet, year round at this latitudes, which is kind of interesting. This was also the furthest southernmost road on the continental Americas that we drove to the very end of where you could drive in South America on the mainland, which was kind of nice and interesting. The Straits of Magellan were on our left, and Tierra del Fuego is across the straits, where you could take a ferry, and those are islands. You could drive further south down there, but not on the mainland. And we did a nice hike, got our second peak of the trip, which is always good. And then we were back. We ended up having one more day in town because of weather and some other issues that arose that delayed us. And this is the plane that we were to fly down to Antarctica on. It's called an Ilyushin 76. It's a Russian military cargo plane that is leased for the season by ALA from a company based in Kazakhstan. And it flies us down and all our equipment. We were kind of delayed because the plane was grounded for a few days because the civil aviation authorities wanted to do some sort of document review, because a Chilean military, I forget what plane, had crashed into the ocean flying from here to their base in Antarctica about a week before. So the authorities were kind of nervous about it, letting anyone fly. So we didn't know what was going to happen or when we were going to go, or if we were even going to get to go. It took a couple of days for that to all be resolved in the background, and who knows how much kind of ransom money had to be paid to what kind of officials to finally give us our permission. But we finally got our approvals to go. And then we were given our 2-hour notice to pack up, get to the airport, and get ready to board. And this flight was kind of the one main unique draws of this whole trip to me, because I'd heard about flying in this airplane and what it's like. I was told it's like $250,000 for a round trip flight of this plane down to Antarctica and back, with fuel and support and everything. So it's a big logistics, and that's what makes part of the trip so expensive too, is this flight. So we finally left after 6 days in Punta Arenas. We're finally on our way to Antarctica. But since this plane is kind of part of one of the interesting parts of the journey, I think it's worth kind of showing what this thing is like. As you can see, it's a very utilitarian, no frills plane. There's no windows, not much heating inside. So we're all in our dress for cold weather for when we get off the plane. They have a big screen TV in the front to show us takeoff and landings because you can't see out. It's an all Russian crew that flies the plane. And this guy in the lower left corner was the load master who was in charge of making sure everything fit and the weight and balance was all correct on the plane. And you can see us in the plane. I managed to snag a front row seat, so I had good leg room for what it was worth. And then, okay, this, how do I start this? This is the screen of us coming into land on a 3-mile long blue ice runway in Antarctica. This is the first how we saw everything coming in under the continent. It's really solid, hard ice. And that's why the base camp is where it is, because of this runway feature. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I want to show you another view of what this plane looks like landing in Antarctica. This is the plane coming in when it was coming to pick us up at the end of the trip. On this flight landing at the time, Conrad Anker and Jimmy Chin were on this flight. They were coming down to do a National Geographic, I think, or North Face climb of Mount Tyee, which is the second largest peak or tallest peak in the Antarctica. But still a unique environment. You can start to get the sense of the scale of everything, even in those photos and videos. So we got off the plane. There's no fancy jetways here, just pull up a ladder. It was really cold and windy out here, and I was shivering within a few minutes of getting off the plane. And I was thinking to myself, if it's going to be this cold the whole time, I'm not sure how well I'm going to do. And I was like, well, maybe I'm in over my head if it's going to be this cold. Yeah, we took a few obligatory photos of the jet and us landing. We had gotten some swag from the guiding company. You'll see these in a lot of photos. Nice down jackets for the climb. But it was, pretty phenomenal experience to be standing on the ice in Antarctica. And then they put us in these big burly off-road vehicles to drive about 5 miles from the runway to the Union Glacier base camp. And everything comes and goes in and out on that Aleutian flight. They fly these trucks in and out of there. They fly even all of the human waste at the camp is flown out. All the food debris and all the food is flying in there on that plane. It's quite an operation. So this is the Union Glacier camp. You can see some distances how many kilometers we are from a bunch of places. They had these nice, comfortable clamshell tents for the guests to stay in. They were very warm, tall, 2 people per tent. It was also much warmer here. So when I got off the shuttle bus, I was very happy that it was warmer, and I knew I might survive this trip because it's more protected from the wind in this area. And all these tents are named after famous Antarctic explorers from the early times, which was and all the base camp tents were named after various explorers as well, or ships as well, which was kind of nice. There's another view of the mountains in the distance and on our base camp. Even though this is all on a glacier, but they make sure that there's no crevasses in the camp before they open camp each year. This is what base camp facilities are like: nice big long dining tents, cook tents. They had kind of nice composting toilets. There was even a shower room, the communications tent, even a gift shop at the bottom of the world. The crew and the employees, they slept in smaller tents beyond these. They had fat tire bikes you can ride around along a little bit. So it's pretty comfortable in the base camp here. And people can go do activities and climb the local mountains. I think there's ice climbing nearby as well. We were going to spend one night at that camp and then board a Twin Otter propeller plane to head to Vinson Base Camp. Those planes seat like 10 people and luggage. And so we did that. So I want to show some video of what the plane ride is like, because this is what you'd come to see in Antarctica, these just vast expanses of snow and ice that are just incredible. Oop, it froze on me. Maybe that was the link. And you can just imagine these peaks aren't very high. We're probably only flying at about 8,000 feet. So these are small bumps in the Ellsworth range, but I imagine that probably none of these have ever been climbed by anyone, and they're not big, significant peaks. They're just minor bumps, but I was flying by, I was thinking, oh, I'd like to climb that one and that one and that one and that one. And there's just in the interior of Antarctica, we're 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles from the ocean. There's just rock and ice. There's no life. There's no birds. There's no green. It's very stark. But you get the sense of how big it is. And here's a little more video just to take it all in. And this just goes on and on forever, these hills and these mountains and these valleys of glaciers between them. When we were there, a trio of French skiers, they decided to ski from Union Glacier to our base camp, and our flight of 45 minutes took them 2 weeks to get to the base camp. But I bet that was a glorious ski tour. And then I want to show you also what it's like, what the plane is like in the Twin Otter arriving at Vinson Base Camp. The day we flew in was like moving day. All of the teams that were going to climb the mountain, we were all on the same plane coming down there, and then we took our turns on the Twin Otters, um, flying into base camp, and then we're all basically going to climb the mountain kind of in one big pack. So I think there's 6 or 7 teams on the mountain at one time. On this mountain, they kind of what they call them rotations, like of 5 different groups doing the climb one after the other over the course of the season. And we were, I think, we were the third rotation of the season. This is kind of what Vinson Base Camp was like. This is all on a glacier too, and the camp moves around a little bit every year, depending on how much the glacier moves. And you can see Mt Vinson is up in the top right. We're at about 6,900 feet. And the green shows our route from where we would go up to the low camp, our next camp, which was called Low Camp. There are 2 camps above Vinson Base Camp. They just call them Low Camp and High Camp. There are also some, for the standard route that we were going to go on, there are also some technical routes that climb up through these areas here that people have done over the years for the more, in a nice fall through here that people have done. And obviously the summit is up here. So those are, let's see here, where we're going to go. And so we had a nice cook tent, mega mid. This is similar to what people use on Denali, on those kind of expeditions. So these were very comfortable for hanging out at the base camp and at Camp 1. We were able to take a lot of gear and leave it at base camp, so we didn't have to worry about weight here. And we left stuff when we were here, when we were higher up on the mountain. So it made it pretty comfortable. And everyone always wants to know how you deal with toilets on these big expeditions. And at this Vinson Base Camp, we had these nicer stools with a bucket. We were also given a wag bag to use in the buckets for ourselves. But as the camps went higher, it got a little sparser. We didn't have the throne at the next higher one. We just had a bucket to stand over. And we also have these, we had to use pee holes, just like on Denali. And because the Antarctica is actually the driest continent on Earth, you can only pee in certain areas. And so there are pee holes designated along the entire length of the route going up all the way on the mountain, even on summit day. So you have to hold it between pee holes, and they're not that closely spaced out either. So, that's how you deal with it in the cold, but, it helps keep Antarctic as pristine as possible. And like Denali also, we're carrying loads on sleds from the Vinson Base Camp to the Low Camp. The snow is very consolidated, and it doesn't really hardly ever snow there, so we didn't need snowshoes, just boots or boots with crampons on for the climbing the first part. And we are roped up because we are on a live glacier. So we did two teams of 3. That's me in the middle. We were doing a load carry this second day up to Low Camp. And then we came back down, I think, and then we moved camp the next day. This was a rare sighting, an avalanche on our moving day from Low Camp to High Camp. It actually had snowed a little bit a couple days prior, so there was some unconsolidated snow that came down, and just a few little puffs of it crossed the track we were going to be on. No one was caught in it, and wasn't anything. But it was, everyone was surprised to see that, certainly. So this is what Vincent Low Camp looks like, one of the tremendous views. Temperatures on this mountain during the day were around freezing in the sun, which wasn't too bad. So you could just be in a few layers and your kind of lighter weight down jacket and be pretty comfortable. When the sun would pass behind the ridge behind this view, then it would get really cold, and that would last for a few hours because again, it's sunlight 24/7, but the sun is fairly low on the horizon, so it would go behind the mountain and get cold. And when it was cold, we just stayed in the tents. It happened to go behind the mountains at about between like 2 and 5 in the morning, which were kind of bedtime anyway, and we stayed on Chilean time zone while we were there. So we didn't get out of the tents when it was in the shade and just waited. And it never got dark, so we didn't need a headlamp either. So that's one less thing to carry. We ended up spending Christmas Day at Low Camp. We did have a Santa sleigh that we pulled around our lead guide on, but I spared you the video of that. We had to spend an extra day here because of there was some avalanche danger that the guides were concerned about. So we waited a day to let it consolidate a little as some of the guides went higher up to assess the conditions. They deemed it to be fine, so we were kind of not worried about that anymore. But for a little while, there was a little concern about whether we'd get turned around and told to go home for everybody in that rotation. A little more of what I think this is supposed to be a video. Hold on. I'm not sure why it's not working. Wait, let me go back, sorry. Laser pointer's making it not work. Oh, maybe I did it. Oh, try it, sorry. All right, I'll forget that. So, yeah, sorry. Back to, so this kind of from Low Camp, this is showing our route up to High Camp. This is where in Mount Shin, the third highest peak in Antarctica, is also on the Vinson Massif, as well as the second highest peak, which is behind that, called Mount Tyee, that you can't see. So from this camp, we have these. The next obstacle is a fixed line that goes about 2,500 feet up up a ridge to where the high camp was, and we're going to do one full load carry to our high camp of everything we need for 4 days maybe of provisions. So we had about 50-pound packs that we were going to carry up there. So keep this view in your eye for a second. And I want to show you some artwork. One of our team members, Alina, she's an artist, and she painted this little image of kind of this view afterwards. So if you kind of like go back and forth, you could see our tents and what it kind of would look like in this area. I think that's kind of nice. So I threw it in there. And this is what climbing the fixed lines. You can see how steep it was. The group behind us, had a rest lunch, and another group just had their rest on the lines. I'm not sure what the angle was, but it felt steeper than that picture looked for sure. And it was relenting for, I think it took us about 9 hours to get up to the high camp. The altitude also on Vincent, even though the peak's only 16,000 feet and getting up to the high camp was only up to like 13,000, it felt much higher than that. I think people say it feels a couple thousand feet higher than it is because of some sort of atmospheric conditions you get at near the pole. But I was taking 2 breaths for every step on the way up with the heavy pack and the stair climbing. And this is kind of nearing the high camp after this long day of climbing the fixed lines with Mount Shin. in the background, which that can also be climbed from this same high camp, but is not climbed nearly as often as Vincent. And then once we got this high, you could really see the kind of Arctic plateau at the end of the range. In the distance, you can really feel like you're getting above everything, and just the like hundreds or thousands of miles of just flat ice out in the distance, and pretty amazing views. Here's looking at high camp from a little outside of camp. And this high camp we're at 12,600 feet, summit's 16,000, so we'll have about, 3,600 feet of climbing on our summit day. This camp is much less hospitable location than the lower camp. It's got hard snow. We couldn't dig pits, so we couldn't bring the mega mid up here. It's just colder, a little breezier. So not quite as nice. We actually also had to spend one extra day here than we had originally planned because our summit day was, the forecast was for too much wind. There was going to be about 25 miles an hour wind with minus 25 degrees centigrade forecast, and that was just too windy for us. Although one Russian team did go up and summit on that day, and as we know, the Russians are pretty hardy, so I don't think they had a great time of it, but they made it nonetheless. We waited out a day. This is kind of what we have to dress like on summit day. Everything covered, no exposed skin at all to avoid frostbite. Our forecast was for also about minus 25 degrees, but only about 10-mile-an-hour winds. So it was going to be a lot better than the previous day, where we had gone out for like an acclimatization hike for a few hours, but that was it. So we waited the day and then got geared up and started like 8 in the morning. This is a shot of our team going up. Initially, there were me and Tony and one guide on one line and the 2 women and another guide on the other line. Tony and I started an hour before the other 3, and they caught us after a number of hours. Eventually, they switched me to rope up with the other 3 because Tony was slowing down a bit. And we weren't sure if he was going to make it or not. So he and one guy just kind of continued up slower, and I joined the others to go the rest of the way. And the 2 women were by far stronger than the 2 of us guys the whole way up. So it was good to see. They were very strong climbers. This is us just below the summit ridge. Still decent weather, a little colder up here as we're getting close. And then Tony, this was him having a break. You could see the summit above us. And the track is pretty well beaten in. It's wanded the whole way, even though this looks like just a snowfield. It is a glacier, so we weren't allowed to wander off the track anywhere because there could be hidden glaciers underneath here, and that's why we stayed roped up the whole way. Most of the summit day is not that steep, or there's no really dangerous sections on this climb. The fixed lines were much steeper than the summit day climb was. Kind of a view almost at the top with one of the faster teams descending behind us. That's me in the red jacket there in the front of the 3. And I hope I can get this video to play. I don't know why. I really want this video to play, but I'm not having luck. Give me a second, because this is. There we go. Sorry. This is us on the summit ridge, almost at the summit. That's our guide, Ozzy, in lead. He's from Ecuador. That's me, second place. You can see how slow we're going at 16,000 feet. The other team descending down. It's very good cramponing snow, but it never, never melts. So it's always nice and firm, but not icy. Okay. And then we're at the top. So I wanted to, let you know about my teammates, because they're pretty great people. Alina Arsova, she was the first Macedonian woman to complete the 7 summits on this peak. And Roxanne Litsnetska, she's the first Ukrainian woman to complete the 7 summits on this peak. So they were both completing their 7th summit quest together on this peak. And if you remember seeing a photo in 2019 of a huge conga line on Mount Everest, Roxanne was in that conga line because she summited Everest in 2019 in May, and then came to Antarctica in December that year. Quite a feat for both of them. And our other folks summiting was our guide, Ozzy Frere from Ecuador. This was his 3rd ascent of Mt Vinson. He was a great guide. And Tony Victor from the UK. He did manage to get a little frostbite while he was taking pictures on the summit, but he's recovered okay. And he's on his quest for the 7 summits. This was only his 2nd or 3rd of the 7 summits. There's a shot of all of us on our rope team. It was so cold, I never kind of took my mask off to get a good view of my face, but I assure you that was me. And then this is me. I put on a warmer jacket because I wanted to make sure I didn't get myself in trouble in the cold, because it was a bit colder and breezier at the top. So, and I brought my WTC bandana to the top. Most other people were bringing flags. So this was my 5th summit of the 7 summits on December 27th, 2019. And I had climbed, so I still have Karsten's Pyramid and Mount Everest to do of the 7 summits. I've done Kilimanjaro, Mount Elbrus, Aconcagua, and Denali. I may someday climb Karsten's Pyramid. I have no ambition to climb Mount Everest. So I may get 6, and I'll be perfectly happy with that. So to get off this mountain, after summit day, we descended that from summit down to high camp, spent the night at high camp, and from high camp, we went all the way down to Vincent Base Camp, where this photo was taken in one day. We flew then from Vincent Base Camp. The weather was good, so the Twin Otters could fly in. They picked us up a couple hours after we got to base camp, flew back to the Union Glacier. We got a nice to celebrate there, spent the night in Union Glacier in one of those nice cozy clamshell tents, and then flew back to Punta Arenas the next day. Just some of the things I know people sometimes want to ask about a trip like this. So we spent, I think, 8 days on the ice in Antarctica as part of the trip. All told, the cost for the expedition was $42,000. All of the guide companies basically charge the same rate because the rate is largely set by the ALE, the logistics company. That price is comparable to many of the guide services and good guide services too on Mount Everest. If you do kind of more independent climbing with the Sherpa support, like on summit day, but not a personal Western guide. So, you know, it is expensive, but most of that is for the flight and the logistics at base camp. The guiding, you're only paying for, you know, 8-9 days of guiding. But it is a completely unique environment and adventure that I felt would be, for me, I didn't want to be on Everest and the whole zoo of all of that and all the people. This felt like a better way for me to spend that same kind of money for an experience that I would enjoy and could remember forever. And that concludes the presentation, as you can see out on the ice runway. Thank you for allowing me to share this adventure with you. I'm going to unshare my screen and I guess figure out how we can do any questions. Probably can unmute yourselves. I don't know.
People can unmute and
Yeah.
speak.
That way I can hear the applause.
There's a couple questions in the chat as well, Paul.
Okay, let me see here. If there's some, again, like, what were the normal daytime temps like in camp? Yeah, it was about, I think it was about freezing. It was generally sunny out. Very few wispy clouds sometimes, but that really didn't, you know, we didn't get socked in weather systems while we were there. Just high clouds. It's the wind that really makes it cold. If it gets windy, it gets cold. Or if you get in the shadows, it gets cold. Yeah, if you were on the fixed line and have to go to the bathroom, you have to hold it. I don't know that there was any pee holes when we were on the fixed line. There was a pee hole area where we took a break on the fixed line when we got off, where I had that photo of us having a lunch break. We could pee over there. But otherwise, yeah, they really try to keep it clean, because you can imagine what would be like, because nothing deteriorates there. It stays forever. Oh dear, breathing issues. Yes, breathing was much more challenging than I thought it would be. And that surprised me some, because I didn't think the altitude was going to affect me that much. I mean, I didn't have any altitude sickness, but it was just labored breathing. And did Roxanne and Alina know each other before the trip? No, they did not. They met each other on the first day, just like I did. Alina had done Mount Everest in like 2013, so it took her a while to like get this one on her schedule. Roxanne was like gung-ho to finish. Although Roxanne said she was still worn out, she said, from Everest when she came to do this peak. And how much time did you pad to allow your flight home? I think I had actually booked my flight for New Year's Day, and it worked out actually pretty well. I think if I was more worried that I would maybe have to move it back. I don't think I ended up changing it at all, because it was like a couple $100 to change the flight. So we weren't really sure. They told us to like book it out a week later, because trips have been known to get stuck on either the Punta Arenas side or the other side, waiting for a week or more for there to be a weather window for the Aleutian to fly, you know, and I wouldn't have minded being stuck on Antarctica and Union Glacier for a week, just hanging out, eating well, and goofing off, you know, before I could go home. But it would have been worse if you're waiting to start your trip. So those are those. I think that's all the questions I saw there. Happy to entertain any more.
Hello, Paul. I have a question.
Sure.
How would you compare Vincent in terms of difficulty to say Aconcagua or Denali?
Well, it's more, well, usually the comparison is more made with Denali in terms of it's similar kind of expedition style in Denali, although it's much shorter, and you're only carrying a sled for a couple days, and usually only half the equipment for a couple days just from the Vincent base camp to the low camp. So you're not hauling it for a better part of like 2 weeks. So that makes it easier. It's a kind of compressed version of Denali. So it is definitely easier. The fixed line I thought was maybe similar in difficulty. I think this fixed line is longer in height. Then there's one that's I think like 1,400 feet on Denali. And it's just a lot different than Aconcagua because that's more a hike on trail mostly at higher altitude. I felt the breathing was similar on the peak there than on Aconcagua and here for rest stepping, even though that's like 6,000 feet higher. But that was a good question. Thank you. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I'll turn it back over to Jim, I think.
All right. Thank you very much. Excellent. Excellent, Paul. Wow. If I had 42,000, yeah, that would be a really cool thing to do. That would really be excellent. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our virtual banquet this evening. And hopefully next January, well, we should be able to have our in-person banquet. In the meanwhile, stay safe. Get out when you can, but be safe. And we're looking forward to restarting our lives as normal. And hopefully this summer, maybe not until, well, it won't be until after July, 4th of July, that the Sierra Club will grant us the permission to do leader trips. And until then, you can still get out and do things. So, all right. Thanks, everyone, and have a good evening.